Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Well, let's get to it, my friends. Welcome to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I just want to touch base with you on the fact that you're probably not seeing the podcast come through Facebook like you were. And that's because Facebook has changed their algorithms yet again in order to censor many of the voices out there that don't fit their extreme left political agenda. Twitter's doing the same. Google's doing the same. We know Apple and Google are now Chinese-based companies and using Chinese censorship algorithms. So it is more imperative than ever that you share these podcasts, that you get this information out there before they make it impossible for me to share it. All the light, foofy spiritual stuff out there, oh yeah, that's good. That's okay. All of the inverted logic stuff, that's okay. Anything real, anything beneficial, anything beautiful is being censored, at least at this point in time. Hopefully this changes. Hopefully it turns around. But until then, please do your part and help me by sharing these podcasts. I will load them manually onto Facebook and Twitter so they can be seen, but they shadow ban most of it as it is now, so that instead of going out to 1,000 people, it only goes out to 5 or 12. But when you share it, it spreads it out there. It gets out to more people. So please help me do that. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as hit the other forms of social media and hit the like button, the subscribe, and all of that stuff. Leave a comment once in a while and it'll show up in your feed a little bit easier too. So help me out. I need your assistance in order to keep this voice out in the world and keep authentic practices being taught without all of the mysticism and dogma. Okay? So, let's get to it. In the past episode, I included something in the practices that I'd like to expand upon. And I've included this in previous practices as well, so maybe some of you will recall that, especially certain mindfulness practices. So those of you that have been engaging in the mindfulness practices that I share, this will probably be nothing new to you. But it's the idea of identifying something as favorable, unfavorable, or indifferent. This method of feeling or understanding the attitude of recognition is very helpful when engaging in observation practices and certain meditative practices. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. When we're engaged in an observational practice, we often pay attention to the way we feel about something, such as in developing mindfulness in our body movement. It's natural, in the beginning, to identify the feeling of the movement as either pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent. And we keep things very simple, just to these three. So we've got a positive, a negative, and a neutral. And that's what we're using in order to identify the originations of such things and then our reaction to them. And through this, we get to interact with it. You do this as a way to connect more deeply to your physical body and begin cultivating the body-mind. The average person on the street is seldom aware of their body at all, let alone exactly how it feels with every movement they make. This is mindfulness. We develop an overall state of mindfulness through doing so, in addition to activating and cultivating what is called the body-mind. This identification process is a tool that we apply within many of our beginning practices. This tool is also applied when we engage in a more mind-focused practice, such as when we observe our feeling or attitude about something as we interpret it through our physical senses. I used the analogy of a muscle car in the previous episode, so if you look at an incredibly awesome muscle car, or whatever it is you might like to look at, a flower or what have you, but if we look at this muscle car, as that information is brought in through the sense organ of the eyes, and you invoke the sense consciousness through the act of seeing, the mind formulates a particular attitude about what it is you're looking at. Basically, it'll be how you feel about it. You may like the car, therefore finding it favorable. Or you may not like the car, finding it unfavorable. Or maybe you find yourself indifferent. You just don't care about the car at all. Right? That's fine. But it's mindful to know which one of those is arising. From this, opinions and beliefs are instantly formed and certain emotional attachments begin to arise. Typically, we're relatively unconscious of this process even as it's happening. And that is the idea, is to bring this more into the conscious mind where we can know it, we can observe it, we can understand it, and we can begin to work with it. You can see then that this is a pretty natural mental process. However, it's an unconscious mental process for the most part, and one we need to engage in order to free ourselves from. We do this by directly observing it, understanding it, and experiencing it as it arises. While the entire process plays out, we continue to experience it, and then we experience it as it begins falling away. Through this, we understand the impermanent nature of all of these things. And we can also see the impermanent nature of the way we feel about things. We can understand why we feel certain ways about everything. Then we begin to work with it all. And the past 3 episodes covered many ways to do this. So in the beginning, we typically acknowledge the negative. The mind is naturally wired towards the negative, and there's a lot of science to back this up. And that's because the ego has dominated the mind. When the ego is not in charge of the mind, such as when you have a small child before the ego has formed, they are not as negative because they don't know that negativity. They're not as unhappy with everything around them because the ego is not forming its desires and its opinions and beliefs. So that thing which we don't feel good about, right, is what is considered to be the negative. In the case of a personality trait, I may recognize something about myself that I really don't care for, perhaps a bad habit I have. Okay, so I have this bad habit and I'd like to change that about myself so I can be a better person. I can take a step closer to becoming the person I want to be. Great, right? You then observe this bad habit as it happens. You watch yourself actually engage in it as it plays out in order to better understand how and why it originates in the first place. As this happens, you form a feeling or an attitude around it. In this case, you'll find it unfavorable. Directly opposing this unfavorable habit will result in the mind strengthening its addiction to the habit itself. So this is to be avoided. We don't want direct confrontation with it. It's not about having more will and just stopping, right? We don't want to do that. Generally, after observing it, we identify with how we feel about it. Then we can begin to work directly with it in order to change it. This is never forcing anything. It needs to be a gentle process so as not to engage the ego and its wrath of resistance. So if we notice a bad habit about ourselves, we avoid getting down on ourselves, becoming frustrated, becoming fed up with ourselves. All of this, see, that's just more negativity. And you're just feeding the ego with all of that negativity and reinforcing the negativity, see? So what we want to do is acknowledge, wow, I do that. I have that bad habit. And then just watch as you do it. Understand why it comes up. Understand where it came from. and just kind of be with it for a little while. From there, once you do that, you're kind of exposing it, and you will start to take its power away. It'll start to become weak. It'll start to dissolve. And from there, it's very easy to then engage it and allow it to change. Now, initially, what's typically taught is that we are seeking to turn this negative into a positive, even though becoming free of the habit itself is the desired outcome. So what happens in most cases is that you end up trading one habit for another. As soon as you're able to take this bad habit and change it into a more positive, productive type of habit, the mind will start to seek another. Unless you are engaging in the proper practices to rid yourself of what desires these habits in the first place. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Okay, so you change the old bad habit into something positive. So you've converted the negative into a positive. For example, maybe you have the knee-jerk reaction where you verbally express your attitude about something, such as seeing something you don't like and having to really forcefully exclaim that you hate it. Oh, I just hate that. That's a strong and highly negative, low vibration type of reaction. You then work to change your reaction to something more positive. Even if you still dislike what sparks that in the first place, you can change from having a mindless negative reaction to it to having a more mindful, positive response. Perhaps now you express your distaste for it a bit more subtly, such as, well, it's not my taste, it's not for me, but I can see how other people could enjoy that. That's cool, right? It's far more positive. This comes across much better and allows you to hold a higher vibration. This turns something from a negative into a positive, and that's a great way to begin. Now, instead of expressing such direct negativity and extreme negative statements, you're expressing the fact that it's not your taste, but you're not attacking it. This is pretty great progress in and of itself, to become mindful enough to change a mindless negative reaction into something more positive, so you can hold your vibration up and steady. Maybe you even change it to something more positive where you find something that you can appreciate about it and you make that your statement. Well, that's not for me, but I can really appreciate the color of that particular muscle car, right? That sort of idea. So you've made this progress, but this is the point where most people stop, especially New Age people. They do so because the change feels so good. It feels good to be positive instead of negative, and rightfully so. But this is not meant to be the stopping point. It's just the midpoint of the path. To remain in this phase, this keeps you in the same basic situation. You're just on the other end of the spectrum. You've not freed yourself from anything as of yet. The negative is one end of the polarity, of the duality of mind, and the positive is the other end of that polarity. It's very easy to become addicted to either of these polarities. This is why we witness so many New Age people pretending to be so happy and flowery and enlightened, and a lot of this is drug-induced. But a lot of it is also the state of mind where they're trying to be that way because they're stuck in the positive. But they think that's enlightenment. That's not enlightenment. You've made a wonderful step forward. But that is not enlightenment or awakening at all. But we become addicted because it feels good. And we become so addicted to what feels good that we can no longer tolerate, we can no longer handle it if something starts to feel negative. People lose it, right? We see this happening. So in this space, though, not only does it feel good, but they start to get compliments. Everybody thinks more highly of them. See, this is all just stroking the ego. It's all just reinforcing a different identity. It's just the other side to the same ego, to the same mind. And all the while, in reality, these people remain frightened and very fragile. Remember, the point of spirituality is to free ourselves from these polarities. And in order to do that, we have to free ourselves from the ego and we have to free ourselves from the mind. That means we have to free ourselves from all of these unconscious mental processes. It's the ego-dominated mind that loves the drama associated with each of these polarities. Authentic spirituality is about seeing through the illusion of such things and no longer falling into the unconscious mental trap of our own mental delusions. To do this, we walk the middle path. We forgo the negative and the positive and embrace the indifferent or the neutral. Now, I know this can sound a bit cold, but I assure you it is not. From this space, you can love unconditionally. From the others, you cannot. Whereas the negative, you cannot love unconditionally because you're always seeking negative feelings and craving drama with someone. And your negative mind will always find things to feel negatively about. From that negative space, you can't possibly have an unconditional love relationship. On the other hand, on the opposite end, from the positive, your love will be conditional upon the other person making you happy and only doing things that you deem acceptable. That they have to be positive. They have to keep you feeling positive. See, this isn't unconditional love either. But if we can free ourselves from either of these polarities, we can rest in the middle and experience true unconditional love and freedom like we have never known before. Polarities only exist because of the dualistic nature of the mind. When we are free of the mind, then we rest in the space that's in the middle. We just rest in a space of acceptance for what is. And we no longer engage in this game of emotional bumper cars where we're bumping into the negative and bumping over into the positive, and we're just bouncing around this way from positive to negative, or we try and stay in one in a fixed point. That doesn't work either. See, it's this space in which we truly just are. It's this space where we can accept what is instead of what we think or believe it should be. Regardless of if it's positive or negative, this is still our mind creating desires and forcing them upon a situation. Decades ago, when I succeeded with this sort of practice, at least to a good degree, to make a massive change in who I was, many people in my life who had supposedly loved me changed their minds. They began to dislike me, very much in some cases. Even my own mother experienced this type of change in sentiment for a while. Can you imagine? But it is true. It's true. The reason was because I no longer provided them with any drama, and these people craved the drama. And back then, I was an ass. And believe me, I definitely provided them with a lot of drama. And see, they became addicted to that. They loved that. And then they would do things to try and spur that on so that, they could push my buttons. I'd create more drama. And for a while, I went to the positive, but I found that even in that, it still had a sense of this drama attached to it. But when I learned to drop it all, when I learned to step outside of the mind's game of the polarities, then I came into this state of being neutral. And it was indifferent to so many things. So these people would say things to me like, I don't even know who you are anymore. You don't act right. Or, I don't know who you're trying to be, but stop it because I don't like it. I even heard things like, you don't seem to care about anything anymore. And as I continued to live in this space, some of their comments became even nastier. And I was able to observe how they were living in that negative state that I had escaped. And all I knew is that I was never going back. There was no way I was going to be who I was. And all of these observations were simply based upon their own ego-driven, unconscious desires and addictions that they didn't like to have changed. For me, however, I was feeling more than ever before in my life. I was feeling where before I had been numb. I felt love more deeply. I actually began to laugh at funny things, and before that, I didn't laugh. I felt vulnerable if I laughed, and I just didn't do it. I was stoic almost all the time, and I stopped being so afraid and defensive all the time. I wasn't bouncing in between extremes any longer. Instead, I held a steady baseline, and this allowed me to experience an entirely new sense of love, joy, and appreciation that I had never at any point in my life previously ever experienced. I found that this sense of happiness allowed me to be happier than even when I was working on all the positive stuff. I know that seems like maybe it would be a contradiction of sorts, but I assure you, this is how it works. When you go through this transformation and you're living in this space that you could call indifference or neutral or whatever, it's just not getting drug into the polarities of duality anymore. It appears to them that you're a little cold or a little unresponsive because you're not reacting to every little thing all the time. But it's not the case. It's not the case at all. It's only how others interpret it according to how it affects them. But there will be some people around you who are just naturally at least a little bit awake, and these other people will begin to recognize your new sense of inner tranquility. See, this is what it is. It's tranquility. It's not indifference in the way that we might define it. It's this base sense of calm and centeredness. It's an inner tranquility. And others will begin to feel this inner peace exuding from you, and they'll want to be around you because of it. Others will want to be away from you because they want the drama. They don't like that feeling of peace and tranquility. This inner peace offers a sense of deep joy and contentment that is no longer dependent upon anyone else or any outside circumstances. Imagine that. Take a minute and think about that. What if you could feel so content and at peace within yourself, so joyous, so appreciative, and none of it at all was dependent upon anyone else, nothing they said or did or anything else, and no other external circumstances. It was just your base state of being. Imagine that. When this happens, you experience a sense of freedom unlike anything you've ever known before. You think you're free, but you're not. You're enslaved by the ego, by the mind. And when you can step outside of that, then you truly know freedom. This space of freedom allows your heart to open and remain open instead of opening and slamming shut, opening again, slamming shut. It allows you to be free of the ego and to hold a steady and much higher vibrational frequency as the base rhythm for who you are. This is the reason we engage in authentic spiritual practices, because it's from this space that we are able to begin experiencing a fully engaged life. Make sure to visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. Pick up your Appreciation Mastery program there. And make sure that you are sharing these podcasts, please. I will be posting them as quickly as I can for you each Monday morning to make sure that you are getting them. I tried to get the program out there so you can enjoy it with your morning cup of coffee. And make sure that you hit the subscribe and like buttons and, all that stuff that helps us get it out as much as we possibly can. Until next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and in your life. Take care.